Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Really good to see you today. Welcome, welcome. We'll give it about a minute or so, let folks get settled in, get their audio set up, video enabled if you are so willing. You know, it's always great to see your faces, but it's entirely optional as well. But welcome. Hi there, welcome in everyone. Seeing numbers go up, really good to have you all with us today. Give it another 30, 45 seconds or so, let everyone get settled in, but welcome, really glad to have you. Hello, welcome everyone. I was gonna say a beautiful sunny day, but it's overcast, but it's still pretty nice here in Portland, but really glad you're here. Welcome, welcome. Hello, welcome in everyone. Right. Seems like numbers are leveling off a little bit. We still might get some more folks joining us, so we'll keep an eye on that. But welcome everyone. We're really glad you're here joining us for this faculty office hours session for environmental studies. My name is Grant Sewell. I use he, him pronouns. One of the admissions counselors in the admissions office. So really glad to be here with you today and really glad to be joined by two of our esteemed faculty members. So we're joined by Koski and Josh Howe, who are here with us to kind of share a little bit more about the work that they do here at Reed, the work they do with students, and a little bit more about their departments that they work with, and also to answer your questions. So the way that this will work is we'll start with an introduction of our two faculty guests. Then we'll turn it over to the two of them to kind of share a little bit more about the departments they work with, the work they do with students, and then we'll turn it over to you to kind of speak to any questions that are on your mind. I would imagine kind of at this point with where everyone is at, you're probably all very familiar with the Zoom chat feature, but in case you're not, towards the center of your screen, there should be the chat kind of icon there. And you can either chat your questions generally to the whole room, or if it's something you kind of want to ask a little more anonymously, you can share that directly to me as well. And so we'll kind of make some time towards the end to kind of speak to things you're curious about, speak to things that are on your mind, and kind of speak to things that'll help you get to know Reed a little bit better. And so that will be kind of the flow. But with that in mind, I will go ahead and turn it over to Josh and Chris, whoever would like to start with an introduction.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Grant. Before we get started, as you get settled, if you could just put your home state in the chat as we go through, and if it happens to be Idaho or Montana, put it in all caps. It's important, I think, for Chris to see these states as they come in, and we like to know where people are coming from. Chris, by the way, has probably been to your hometown and knows its politics better than you do, particularly if you're from anywhere in the greater American West. My name is Josh Howe. I'm the chair of environmental studies. I'm also the chair of the history department, which, as you, there's a Wyoming, Chris. There we go. Which, as you might expect, means that I'm mostly an environmental historian. And I'm one of the 5 faculty members associated with the environmental studies program. I am the chair, but really we work as a committee, as a team. And so today I think we want to go over a little bit about the program, introduce ourselves, introduce you to some of the other faculty members who are not actually here on Zoom today, but who are here at the college, and most importantly, give you all a chance to ask some questions of us so that we can try to make this as useful and helpful as possible. Before I go any farther, Chris Koski.
Hello, welcome to the Zoom. Thanks a lot, Josh, for that introduction. I do like knowing where people are from. It's often the way that I remember folks' names. And I do happen to be from Montana originally. I'm married to somebody from Wyoming, so I have this affinity with Abigail already. However, over time, of course, I've developed an affinity with many of the states. I've only not been to 2 of them. I teach political science here at the college. I'm also in the environmental studies program, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. I think one of the things that Josh has sort of getting at with the number of hats that he's wearing, both as chair of history as well as chair of political science, is that our program has individuals who are part of it, which we'll talk about in just a second, who are not just specific to environmental studies, but often find themselves in different departments or are based in other departments. And I think one of the benefits associated with that is that the faculty themselves are both substantive knowledge, have the substantive experts in specific areas, existing disciplines of academia, but are also really interested in working with people outside of their disciplines. And I think interdisciplinarity is a thing that is a word that we use a lot. It's a very common buzzword. It's very difficult to do in practice. And one of the things, at least we have structurally as an advantage here at the college, is that we have folks that are interdisciplinary in their very jobs. So yeah, I'm in the political science department. I'm the Dan Greenberg Chair of Environmental Studies. I study a lot of different things. We can talk about that. But I'm really happy that you're all here and thinking about coming to Portland, where it is not raining right now. That's correct.
Just right now, it has been bucketing down rain for the last couple of days. So who are we and what do we do? I think that's probably a good place to start. Environmental studies is an interdisciplinary program that's focused on a broad environmental education surrounding science and politics, or science and policy, I should say. We are made up of 5 departments, we are contributed to by 5 departments. They are history, political science, economics, chemistry, and biology. We refer to them as flavors often. Those are the concentrations within environmental studies. Every environmental studies major is an environmental studies something major, and it is one of those 5 majors. We've designed the program so that students within the major get the depth of that home department, and you are a, say, political science major with very few exceptions in terms of the courses that you're going to take to be a political science major. You just happen to have taken extra environmental political science courses, and you've satisfied your larger group requirements by taking a set of courses that give you a broad-based environmental education that enable you to be fluent from both the science and social science side of environmental issues. And that's kind of what we do. We've designed the program to take advantage of the things that are happening in the departments. Each of us teaches environmentally themed classes within our home departments that are available to environmental studies students to take as part of their major plan. In addition, we have created 2 standalone courses that environmental studies students take. The first is a skills-based intro to environmental studies course that Chris can talk about in a little bit. It's called Environmental Studies 200 that students typically take in one of their first 2 years. And the second is we call it a non-disciplinary project-based course called ES 300 that involves working in groups with a stakeholder to solve a real-world environmental problem for real people in real life. And those are 2 courses that are required of environmental studies along the way. In addition, students have an opportunity to write an environmentally themed thesis in their home department, and often we have seen those get pretty interdisciplinary with input from members of the environmental studies committee who are not in the home department. So there's a little bit of a choose your own adventure when it comes to thesis as to just how interdisciplinary that is. And so that's like an overview of what our program looks like. We support that program through our teaching, and our teaching often builds on the research that we do. So Chris is going to talk about everybody else's research, but I may as well talk about my own because I'm probably the one who knows it. Most of my research has been in history. It's been in the political history of climate change. So I've written a couple of books about the politics of climate change and some things about the Keeling curve and how knowledge about climate change has been created. Since then, I have turned toward studying toxics and toxic chemicals of various sorts, and I'm particularly interested in toxic exposures during the global war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's kind of the quick and dirty of the research that I do. While Chris starts talking about research, I'm going to put some slides up that he made that are, there's a lot there. Don't worry, there's not a test on this, and he's going to give the TLDR on faculty research for, he doesn't know he's going to do this, so I'm putting him on the spot here.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's great. It's awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome, Chris.
I can also share these slides, but yes, that sounds good.
Would you prefer to share these slides so you have control over them?
Okay. Yeah, I think it probably makes more sense to do that.
Okay,
Just
do
give
it.
me a second. Thank you very much, Josh, for. Can you all see the slides? Yes? No? No, apparently not. Sorry.
Not
Try it again.
anymore.
Oh, you could. I saw thumbs up. Not anymore. Well, thank you, Josh. I need a thumbs up from you. I'm looking to you for a trial. Okay, folks can see that. Great. All right, so there's not a test, I promise. I'm happy to give these slides to you later, which is the thing I say all the time. A couple of things. Josh mentioned his own research. Another key member, a core member of the faculty member who's been part of the program the most is Noelle Nettisell. She's in economics. She does a number of different work. You can see here, there, and there. She's engaged in a number of, as you might imagine, valuation studies. More specifically, she's engaged in studies that are trying to essentially help stakeholders, notably the city of Portland, but other kinds of stakeholders appropriately value the losses that are associated with floodplains. As we all know, flood risks are going to increase over time, particularly with climate change. Moreover, the ways that we have counted flood risks, or at least tried to calculate flood risks in the past, have been incorrect. In addition to that, our policies have also been built on the shaky foundation. And as a result, we have a number of communities that are potentially at risk for floods who, frankly, are not appropriately either warned of it or appropriately indemnified against it. And so as a result, this kind of research essentially is calling into question the existing way that we rate risk associated with floods. Now, if I'd led with, this is about risk, not super exciting, but when you consider that most of the communities that Noelle's researching are communities where English is not the first language, or also communities that don't have the capacity to move very easily. These are the kinds of things, communities that need more support, and this is the research that's going to do it. There's just a series of, well, I've highlighted also the fact that there are many students that are involved in these projects over time. This is Julianne Fry, who was until very recently a chemist here at the college. Sorry to lose her, but her research, which is similar to other kinds of atmospheric research you'd find here, is looking more specifically at the potential for pollutants, more specifically how it is that diesel particulate matter emerges from stationary sites, as well as stationary construction sites, as well as a rail yard that's close by. So what she has done with a number of students over time is to develop both sort of spatial orientation associated with spatial orientation of these pollution, and then to try to figure out what other kinds of chemicals are held within these particulates. When particulates come out of a diesel engine or any other kind of engine, it's not just soot, rather I should say it is soot, but soot is not just carbon, it's a bunch of other stuff, often heavy metals that are associated with the engine itself. And so the research here is at one time, designed to try to create a broad understanding of what the potential distribution of pollution is, but then it's also try to figure out what the actual pollutants are. If you look at most environmental policy, we understand a couple of key environmental elements, like, for example, sulfur dioxide or nitrous or SOx and NOx, or other kinds of chemicals that are related to ozone depletion. When it comes to particulate matter, what's often referred to as PM 2.5, that's really, really small particles you can't see, or even PM 10, which are slightly larger, but still really, really small particles. Those particles tend to be an incredibly heterogeneous chemical species that have a variety of impacts we just simply don't understand. So a lot of her work is in what we would refer to as secondary aerosol chemistry, where there's an emission of some variety from a thing, let's say it's an engine or some kind of combustion, and then the secondary effects of that are to combine with other kinds of chemical species that exist in the area. Those chemical species could be other things that are emitted, or they could be things that are biologically emitted, such as what are referred to as biological volatile organic compounds, or BVOCs, which then produce these kinds of species, which ultimately we have very little understanding of. So she's trying to get a better sense of that. And there's sunshine. This is just Josh on the right-hand corner where he's not. I want to point out this bit here, Josh not working. And this is, of course, Josh's slide. He just told you about it. That's me sledding. That's my dog behind me. You can't really tell that he has a head, but I promise it's coming after me. I do a lot of different kinds of research. I suppose for the purposes of environmental policy, I engage in research that's largely focused on the decisions that governments are making with regard to adaptation to climate change. I look at a number of plans that either localities or states engage in for the purposes of trying to think about how we're going to live in a warmer planet. A lot of that involves reading a bunch of what I would refer to as not particularly exciting planning documents and then trying to put them into some kind of comparable format. And I've done a lot of this work with former students. Megan Keating graduated in 2018, and Alma Sialongi, who was a history major or ES history major who graduated in 2014. I've also done some other work recently, which is a little more science fiction oriented, but this is stuff about geoengineering. For those of you who've read Ministry for the Future, that's what this is about, or seen this really not very good movie, Geostorm, with Gerard Butler. Anyway, this is the kind of like the third rail of climate politics, where you've got folks that are interested in trying to stop the amount of carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere for the purposes of course, eventually slowing or even returning back to some previous history of carbon of temperature. Then you've got other folks that, like most of my other research, which is trying to figure out how to live with the both existing changes to the climate as well as anticipate the future and try to live with those. And then there's a group, very small group of folks that are thinking that, maybe we can sort of hack the planet and engage in a series of other kinds of climate interventions that are very controversial, would involve a lot of international consternation, are also very uncertain. These are mostly not really on the radar of most policymaking organizations, but attention to this issue is creeping up, and where we've run, for example, a survey of Oregonians and Washingtonians to ask them some questions about that. As you might imagine, that's difficult since people don't know much about it, so you have to educate them. And then this is by far the best picture of all of us. This is Aaron Ramirez, looking like Josh said, looking like somebody who's going to sell you beef jerky. I thought maybe somebody who belongs, on a paper towel, some variety to compete with Bronny. Aaron does a lot of work investigating the effects of climate change on forests. He's really interested in wildfire biology. He also does work in climate refugia, which are these parts of ecosystems that might be more resistant to climate change, and therefore might be places where species that are otherwise pushed out of the other parts that are more vulnerable might end up. And he's primarily somebody who's referred to as a translational ecologist. That's somebody who essentially does a lot of scientific work, but works in sort of the boundary between science and policymaking. The idea behind most of his research is intentionally applied. And it's intentionally trying to work with stakeholders for the purposes of addressing these kind of what we might refer to as kind of wicked problems that we will expect to experience in the future. And ultimately, even though it seems like scientists you might see scientists everywhere you're looking, or read scientists' impressions of climate change, there still are these significant gaps between the communities that are going to be making decisions regarding climate policy and the folks that are actually understanding climate change. And it's not as if one is better than the other. It's just that they have a hard time talking with each other. So Aaron's work is really devoted to trying to bridge that gap. So that's the what I would refer to as the kind of the research hook for all of us. We all engage in research over the summer. We try to engage in it during the school year. It turns out that's difficult because our teachers are, that's our day job and night job, sometimes weekend job too. But we are interested in incorporating students in much of that research as possible. And all of our research at this point, all of us that have research agendas in the program, I might add the Read for a Liberal Arts College has a pretty rigorous and supportive research agenda. All of us in this program are intentionally designed projects at this point that are supposed to involve undergraduates. It's not only that we sort of casually might involve you in a project, but projects that we create are specific to involvement from you over the summer. And I think Josh might be able to talk about other features of summer, which are things like summer funding opportunities. Is that possible?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm capable of that. One of the cool things about READ in general is that there are a variety of ways in which we try to support students as they gain both research experience and work experience that's going to help propel them into careers beyond READ, whether that's graduate school or something better than graduate school, which is most things, now that I think about it. In environmental studies, we have a series of potential opportunities that students have taken advantage of over the course of the past 10 years that have really given them an interesting kind of set of directions once they leave READ. And the heart of that is a set of fellowships that are called the Environmental Studies Summer Experience Fellowships. Students apply typically to work with external organizations, but sometimes on projects of their own making. And the Environmental Studies Committee decides which of these to fund. By fund, what we mean is that you get to go work for an organization and Reed foots the bill. We have a couple of longstanding relationships with organizations like the Salmon Valley Stewardship that does pollinator and local sustainable agricultural research in the Salmon River Valley in Idaho. But we also have students that come up with a variety of their own unique projects, working with folks like solar installers, or we had one a number of years ago, environmental studies history major design a series of bird identification cards in English and Spanish to help engage the Latinx community of Portland in birding, and was they created a relationship with the Audubon Society and won a bunch of big awards for these hand-drawn cards. That's on the sort of far end of the independent range of these. But the Environmental Studies Summer Experience Fellowship is not exclusive to environmental studies majors, and environmental studies majors tend to be the ones doing these things. So as with most environmental studies things, you don't have to be an ES major to participate. That goes for most of our classes. It also goes for these summer experiences. Often students choose to be environmental studies majors, and they're the same students who are interested in these fellowship opportunities. In addition, we have a number of other both college-wide and environmental studies department-specific research funding opportunities. And those, I won't get into the weeds on those, but they tend to involve research directly with environmental studies faculty. So economics supports one of those, political science is part of one of those, and history also has its own links to collaborative research grants for students. Students have leveraged these in a variety of different ways. One environmental studies major in particular was environmental studies political science. Got a won an SE to work with, I think it was the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. Is that who Raf? Yeah, and just literally has leveraged that into one position after another to become a pretty major player in the environmental nonprofit world in Oregon, and that's kind of one of many examples of how students have leveraged these experiences for successful post-Reed careers. And those are myriad successful post-Reed careers. Maybe Chris, you want to talk a little bit about what some of our students have done after Reed?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. I think it's one of the biggest questions you have. The funny thing is that one of the biggest questions you have about when choosing a college is what's going to happen when it's all over. Sort of like forgetting that there's a big 4-year span of you being in college, arguably the best time of your life. But afterward, yeah, you do eventually go on, and you become a member. You pursue a number of different paths. I think Reed has this reputation for producing students that go on to graduate school, and that's true. I think that's changing. I think it's changing from maybe not the perspective of the number of students that go on to graduate school, but the types of graduate schools they go to. I think initially we were viewed as an institution that produces a lot of PhD seeking students, and that's true. But more of our students now are going on after college to either directly into the workforce, or if they're going on to graduate school, it's often for some kind of much more like narrowly applied master's degree or some other kind of training that emerges from that. So I can speak to, for example, folks we have here in political science. We've had a fantastic wide range of success. We've got, for example, Marissa Hazel, who Josh knows all these students well. So anyway, Marissa Hazel, who wrote a thesis on Superfund implementation on tribal lands, and then went to law school in Colorado, and then got a job working in environmental and tribal law for the government. I mean, that's a straight line from thing that Marissa did in college to things she's doing now. Pretty competitive jobs to get those tribal and environmental laws with the government, I must say. Josh mentioned Rafaela. Another member of Rafaela's cohort was Kate Hiltz, who went on to do a number of jobs in campaign work. She's I don't know what she's doing now. She was working for Planned Parenthood. Then she was the digital director for the National Education Administration. She worked on the Warren campaign for quite a while. She's sort of a DC insider. So if you're any of you are over in DC, you can look her up, and she will definitely help you out with stuff. And then another student who would more recent grad would be Alex Gumas, who graduated and wrote a thesis about the fact that the Oregon has a 10-cent deposit, and Washington has no deposit. It's very strange. Why is that? She later went on to get a master's degree in environmental management at Bard, and now she works in waste management, which I know doesn't sound exciting, except for that's an incredibly important thing with regard to the environment, and it's something, again, she wrote a thesis about. So there is this, you're not going to always work on stuff that's related to your thesis, although almost Lagi certainly did, but you will often find yourself with these kinds of tools to not only do the job, but also the Reed network of the recent graduate network of Reed students is particularly strong. And I find that we lean heavily as faculty on those folks to describe the kinds of things that, or rather to help students find jobs, or at least to sort of navigate the job market. And they're particularly successful. I mean, my take is that, if you want a job at a college, or if you want to do something at a college, you kind of have two paths. Essentially, you go back to college or you go to get a job. If you want to go back to college, the faculty can help you pretty well with that. If you want a job, we have recent alums that can also help you with that. And most of our students, I would say, are doing things that they that are definitely well within the bounds of things that they expected to do and things that they're interested in doing. One last thing I would say is that one last thing is that I found that over time, a lot more of our students are interested in some version of education, which seems sort of new, but not new when you consider that maybe the past version of education might have been higher education. They became professors and teachers in that regard. I think a lot of our students now are interested in environmental education as an outlet, and they've engaged in a number of different, really, I think, unique ways of doing that. Either through, like Hayden Henderson, who went to PSU and basically to try to make it so that school lunches are plant-based, or somebody like Pixie Freeman, who wants to work with environmental education with young children, wrote a thesis on just that, trying to figure out what climate education does. We see a lot of students that are going into not only the sort of the politics sector, not only the graduate work, which then eventually takes them on to much more specific things like being professors or being researchers. We also see people, regardless of whether they're political science or biology, folks that are interested in environmental education, and the kind of interdisciplinary major that we have here makes you pretty good at that. So I wonder what's next, Josh. Should we?
I think what's next is that we've been talking for like half an hour. And so we should, before Grant's head explodes, because we haven't done it yet, we should start taking questions and see what these folks are interested in knowing about environmental studies.
Yeah, no worries. No head exploding here. So you all are doing great. I did have one question that was messaged to me, and that was just, and I think you may have already touched on it, but I'll ask it for the group. What might be different, studying, environmental studies or an environmental studies intersectional approach at Reed versus maybe like a large tier 1 research school, or what might be kind of the benefits there?
That's a really good question. There's a couple of important differences at Reed. The first is that at large R1 institutions, there's typically a distinction between environmental science and environmental studies. And in environmental science departments at big institutions, it's essentially an environmental science and management degree that's very kind of like job-specific training. It doesn't have the same kind of broad-based policy engagement, and environmental studies programs at large institutions often don't have the same rigor in science requirements. That's one difference. The second major difference, and this is, I think, really a strength of a program like this, is that because we're so small, we as faculty and you all as students are always in conversation with each other. We have really strong cohorts in ways that you don't see at big R1 institutions. That sort of cohort mentality, both among the faculty and among the students, lets you be an environmental studies major, always in conversation with majors from other disciplines within environmental studies. So I think those two things would distinguish a liberal arts environmental studies program from some of these larger tier one research institution programs. We're also structured a little bit different from some other liberal arts programs in that we still rely on the rigor of the departments in such a real way. And I think often at its best, environmental studies provides kind of a home both in the department and in the program. And I think that ends up being a pretty unique feature for our students. I saw a couple of questions in the chat. So the first is about whether the flavors of environmental studies are set in stone or can other connecting subjects be taken with environmental studies? And the second is, how easy or common is it to take classes from other divisions of the environmental studies department? Okay, so I'll just keep rolling here for a second. The first answer is that environmental studies as a major is those 5 flavors are set in stone. They were created in part because there was so much ad hocery going on that we wanted to be able to give students something more concrete and definitive. Students often want to take other types of classes and couple their environmental studies education with other disciplines in different ways. We 100% encourage that. It is all too easy to get over-focused on majors. Everybody at Reed, every student at Reed has elective courses that they can take either to pursue interests or to enrich the education that they're getting as part of their major. So we're 100% on board with that. And we have good relationships with other departments that offer environmentally themed classes, even when they don't kind of count toward the major in the way that you might expect.
So yeah, I mean, a couple other answers here. It's very easy to take classes outside of the division. There are a number of I think what Josh, the kind of like the bureaucratic response to this is that there are a number of other classes you'll have to take to get a degree from Reed, and therefore you'll have a lot of opportunity to take other classes to get that degree. We want to reiterate something that Josh said before, that there really is this fine balance in the program between the sciences and the not sciences. I don't know what else to say. Although social science or whatever. Anyway, the sciences and not sciences, which you often find that balance very difficult to achieve in other programs, period, large or small. You tend to find, as Josh said, these kind of very science focused programs or these very not science focused programs. And when we first started this program, the feedback we got from the folks, for either alums and trustees, folks who worked in the sector, was like, you need to make sure that you really maintain the rigor of both of these things. So when you maintain the rigor of both of these things, it makes it so that you do have to make some choices with regard to the kinds of things you're going to require of students. There's still flexibility to do a bunch of other stuff, but ultimately, there are 5 majors on campus that are associated with their environmental studies majors. That said, you can take classes in a number of other departments. There was another question here from Melanie about whether the Reed does Reed include community engagement in environmental studies classes. Community engagement is something the college is working on broadly. Environmental studies, however, frankly, the first course it ever offered was about community engagement. It's about working with external stakeholders. And so the environmental studies JSEM, the 300 course that Josh mentioned, it's a class that he's taught for many years. I taught it for years before that. That class always involves some conversation with an external stakeholder who can be a variety of stakeholders. It can be a non-governmental organization. It can be the government. It can be a tribe. It can be, depending on what we're doing for that year, there's always been some kind of effort to try to link together the community with the actions of that class. I got to say, the class itself, as a result, becomes it can be a wild ride because you are working with live ammunition, so to speak. You have 12 weeks to do this thing that you've promised somebody you're gonna do, and it can be very it's much more difficult than the stakes associated with a typical undergraduate class. If you don't do the reading one day in undergraduate, my class some days like, well, it's the the whole class isn't going to fall apart. But if you don't do the part of the project that the stakeholder wants, then all of a sudden, the project doesn't come together. I know it sounds like a pressure cooker, but at the end of the day, the juniors really get to know each other very well by the end of that, and they come together as a class.
Anya had a question about the potential for field research as a potential ES bio major. And I'm glad you asked, Anya, because that is, if there's a strength of the program, that is what it is for the ES bio majors. We have opportunities, in part because Aaron Ramirez, all of his work is field work. He has a lab, and it's a mobile lab. The trailer in the slide that Chris showed is actually a mobile lab to be able to do more work at field sites. Some examples of some previous field research that students have done. In some of the research, they're looking at the way that old growth coniferous species responded to climate change, and one of the ways to do that is to sample some kind of canopy growth through time. And so they have a chainsaw that is attached to a drone that they have used to take samples of new growth canopy over the last couple of years. And one student was involved in that last year, where not only did they get to use the drone, but also they get to climb these like hundreds of foot tall trees in order to take samples all throughout kind of coastal Oregon and Northern California, which is part of the range that Aaron works in. Isaac Ball is doing some interesting fire regeneration work that's all field work for his thesis this spring. So this is pretty much, it's not what every ES bio student does, but it is like one of the main opportunities. We also have a couple of other biologists who do environmentally related work and support field-based theses. So Sam Fay is one of those who students often tend to go to. Keith Carrolley also does those things. So tons of opportunity to do field work in biology. Often there's been opportunities to do field research in chemistry. Field research in history means going to dusty archives, and we all do it, but it's not really field research because it's in archives. And you all send people out to do surveys and stuff sometimes, right?
Yeah, we do. We have them do that sometimes, but most of what we do is indoors now. Rallies can be dangerous. Our students tend to go to different rallies and stuff like that. That's not usually part of research. That's just sort of part of sometimes being in Portland.
Chris and I have science envy sometimes when we see the tools in the field research that our science colleagues get to engage in.
Yeah, sometimes we just take them just to hold on to them. Like we have an infrared camera that sometimes we like to use just to show that we think we know something about infrared.
You use that to monitor insulation on garages for the original ES300 project, right? That's
right. The first ES300 project was to work with the city of Portland to try to update their climate action plan. Their climate action plan didn't have a weatherization component to it. And weatherization is one of these like low-hanging fruit when it comes to climate change because it's relatively inexpensive. There's a social justice angle to it because a lot of folks who don't have it are poor. It saves you your electric bill or your heating bill. And we went out and in the early morning hours of February, we took infrared images of houses and looked to see where the heat was being lost. And we compared different blocks of houses based upon year to say, okay, if you're going to have a plan, look at these year of houses. And sure enough, it ended up in the climate action plan. So it does happen. Alyssa, what is it like living in Portland?
It's just like Arizona.
Yeah. What's it like living in Portland? I haven't lived in Portland as an 18-year-old. I think that's a difficult thing for me to answer. I live in Portland as a 42-year-old. I know, hold back your shock. 42-year-old who has 2 children and a dog, and what might not be the life that you would want to live in college. I think it's great. The public transportation is fantastic here. The setting of Reed is removed enough from the city that you can go downtown if you want to. I don't really know why you'd go there, but you go downtown if you want. Well, there's a great pinball arcade there. You should go to that. It's called Ground Control. But then you can also come back relatively easily. It's an incredibly walkable, bikeable city, despite the fact that it may not be as big as some of the cities you're from. It has really you would not need a car to experience the city of Portland. I mean, Josh and I don't spend probably as much time in the urban areas of Oregon as we do in the not urban areas of Oregon, which is to say we do field work that isn't related to read field work. And the area, and I think Oregon is still a relatively undiscovered, gem for outdoor recreation opportunities. A lot of our students, at Reed are indoorsy, but a lot of students that are associated with the ES program tend to be pretty outdoorsy. And their Mount Hood is relatively close. The coast is relatively close. I know the college offers great fun trips that will take you to both of those places. If you have a car, you really, I mean, once you get maybe, I don't know, a 2-hour drive, particularly east or south, particularly east. Once you go 2 hours east of Portland, it is a wide open vista. It's everything that you would expect on a postcard of the West. And for you, Alyssa, there are parts of Oregon that are probably as dry as Arizona, although they are not quite as warm, at least in the winter. So I like what Portland is. Like, I play a lot of pinball. There's a lot of good arcades here, which again doesn't matter to most of you. There are also good transportation, and the area around here is great for exploring. It truly is. And Josh is mentioning all these other things, which are probably more appropriate.
It's also super bike friendly, which is really nice if you need to get around. And it does rain a lot, but it rains a lot for like part of the year. And then for part of the year, it doesn't rain at all. So like in the fall, you pretty much have a couple months of glorious, do whatever you want and don't worry about the rain. And then in the spring it rains.
Yeah, I'm looking at the cadre of folks that are here. The Californians may find it to be cloudier than they like, unless they're from, Arcata or something. Or they might find it a little wetter than they might like. The Minnesotans and the Illinoisans, I don't know, and New Yorkers are going to be just fine with this climate. And honestly, yeah, it's right. It's wet, but like then we have this experience. The best part about being a Reed is like from basically like July to really the end of September, it doesn't really rain. It's something that I think people don't understand about the Pacific Northwest. I probably should a little bit, but it doesn't really rain. And the falls are great. Just, once basically late November kicks in, it gets sucked in, but then you go home. So, for the worst bits of the year, it's, you're either here because you like to be here or you're at home. I like it here.
Yeah, and I was going to say, as a Portland native and someone who I guess was here when I was 18, I think there's plenty to do, a lot of things you can fill your time with. But had a student who was kind of curious, and I know this might be a little bit of a general question, but if either one of you could kind of talk about what maybe a typical class kind of in the environmental studies space might look like during your first year, and how students also kind of adjust to Reed's grading model, like within the departments you kind of work in.
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, our classes look a lot different. I talk a lot slower than Chris does, and I don't really talk slow. The history and social science classes in particular are built on a discussion-based model, and that has a number of different looks to it. So in a history class, environmental studies history class, typically there won't be a lot of lecturing. There'll be a sort of small pile of reading that students are responsible for before they show up to class, and they may be asked to split into groups to address a prompt, or we may just start with a group discussion that will lead them through those readings. Often, if there are topics that students are unfamiliar with in a 200 level class, the types of questions that faculty and other students ask of them require students to sort of reverse engineer a lecture from the reading. So it's a strategy of Socratic learning that both allows space for students to explore their ideas, but also helps to kind of create some foundational knowledge. At the higher levels, it's much more of that, more student tossing around student ideas and really thinking with the material that you've been been given. And that's what it looks like in the kind of true discussion space. And I know that political science classes often do that, and sort of economics classes. As you move toward the hard science, you get a little bit more lecturing. And I think that, Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you also do some sort of short form lecturing that will set up discussions in ways that you wouldn't see so much in some other discussion-based classes.
It's a very diverse range of what Josh has described is correct. I like that reverse engineering metaphor. That's exactly how we would describe the 200 level classes. It's a very diverse array of stuff. A lot of the classes that we teach and as environmental, like as professors here, the 200 level courses that Josh and I teach are taken mostly by non-majors. I mean, most of the students I teach in American government are people that are not going to major in political science or environmental studies, political science, or environmental studies, anything. And so in that regard, you've got you've kind of have I find that I need to have a little more structured classroom environment where we'll have like a formal, I'll talk for a bit, and then we'll also have readings. We're going to dive into the readings. We do depend upon students, honestly, to drive the conversation. And if you don't, well, then one of two things happens. Either faculty members just embrace the silence, which, as you might imagine, I cannot do. So I'll just continue to pepper folks with questions until they, pipe up. The upper division, I think the other thing to sort of consider is that, there's like a gradient that Josh mentions between sort of the natural sciences and the social sciences and the humanities, where you'll find that the econ, for example, is kind of in the middle of that, where econ, particularly early econ classes, it's a lot of lecturing. I mean, it's supply and demand, Phillips curves, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually, as you get into the upper division classes, you're more likely to discuss what you learn, or you're gonna drive it. But there are certain kinds of, have to walk before you can run kinds of skills you just have to learn first, and that's going to be the case. Regarding the grading policy, I find that there's a lot of, initial consternation about it, because your entire life you have, and it's appropriate consternation, because your entire life you've been just on your grades for the most part. There are some exceptions. Maybe if you go to a certain kind of school, like a Waldorf school or something, it's less important. But most of you are going to be paying attention to your grades. My son checks them every day, which would drive me nuts, but he does. I understand most of you do. And it's been this kind of currency that this language that you can use to discuss with your parents about how you're doing, how your faculty have discussed with you. It's also a currency you've used now to parlay into a college education. And you get to college and the currency doesn't work anymore and the language isn't the same. And so I think that part can be relatively jarring. I will say that, most of us are not interested in giving you poor grades. Most of us are interested in you learning for the sake of learning. And so our conversations really are less about whether you deserve a B+ or an A- or something like that, and more about to what extent, where are the areas that you need to improve, and have you improved since then? I can tell you that, I've taught in systems before that are the traditional system of, grading, and, there's a lot of information in a grade. It's a lot of information that, frankly, it's an easier thing to grade papers for me than it is to write comments on papers, because I don't have to pay as much attention. I can write a rubric that's straightforward, sort of locks you into particular outcomes. In this situation, one of the advantages is when you sort of, let's say you have a rough first couple of weeks in a class, over time, I'm not stuck with whatever grade I've given you for that first assignment, because we don't have this kind of this very open grade. But I can look at it as a sort of improvement throughout the entire semester. And I could say, all right, well, that first assignment wasn't particularly the strongest thing that they could do. But, it's clear that they learned from the comments, and ultimately at the end of the semester, they've improved a lot. In a traditional grading system, whatever you got in that first assignment, unless I had built in some, very complicated Byzantine structure for dropping one, taking the other, et cetera, that's what you're stuck with, right? The concrete is hardening on this fence post. And in this case, that's not going to work for most of you. The Wyoming person, it would work. In this case, though, we have this opportunity really to have this kind of intellectual conversation with you as a student. And yeah, at the end of it, okay, there's a grade. But I can say that in general, students after the first year or so start to get it. They start to understand that they really are here to learn for the sake of learning. And I have, usually around 20 to 25 advisees, which is high, by the way, so don't expect that. And I would say of those advisees, maybe 3 a year ask me to look at their grades. I have several students by the time they're juniors who'll say, well, I got to look at my grades for the first time because I'm going to apply to graduate school. Just becomes something you don't think so much about. It can drive you a little bit, make you have some uncertainty, but just know that we care about the learning process, and find that those letter grades kind of sort of get in the way of it. And I know that sounds may not be satisfying to you, but if you come to read, it's something that the good news is that everybody's going to be in the same boat, so you're in good shape.
I'll just build on that to try to address Ivy's question. That makes Read so rigorous is that your feedback is almost always tailored toward where you are in your learning, which means that most students are challenged most of the time. It feels rigorous in part because even if you're sort of at the top of what would be a grade scale, you're still getting feedback on what you've done well and also what you can do better. So the rigor in some ways comes from the kind of flexible feedback mechanism that we're afforded by not having grades on each assignment. Beyond that, I think it, by all accounts, when our students go to graduate school, they come back and say, Read was really rigorous. Like, I'm very well prepared. The stuff I did at Read was a lot harder than what I'm doing now, or I'm more prepared than my peers, which suggests that it's very rigorous. It would get into Read for good reasons, and the vast majority of them are prepared to learn in this way and succeed. And that's, if the measure of rigor is like how difficult students find it, well, students find it difficult because we make it difficult because they're ready to be challenged. So that's, maybe the way that I would go with that. The more specific question that Abigail had about thinking about law school or environmental law degree, I would say that really any of the 5 environmental studies flavors would enable you to go to law school. Our track record suggests that history and political science are those that feed law school more directly. But part of the idea of our major is that you have a grounding in both the math and natural sciences and the social sciences when it comes to environmental issues, such that you could do something like go to graduate school with an ES biology degree. You'll have experience with policy, experience with sort of critical thinking and writing in ways that set you up pretty well.
So Claire's asking about the 5 flavors briefly. It's environmental studies history, environmental studies political science, environmental studies economics, environmental studies chemistry, and environmental studies biology. And just a brief recap, the majors themselves are not particularly distinct from, say, majoring just in biology or chemistry, econ, et cetera, except for the fact that there's this additional framework of classes that are either in two cases specific to environmental studies, and then in other cases that are designed to make it so that you take environmentally oriented classes in other departments across the campus than just your home department. As a result, the cool thing is that I have a lot of students in my classes that are, I have a lot of natural science students and majors in my classes that I'm sure I would not otherwise have. And I can say that while those students tend not to be as discussion oriented, given the sort of training associated with natural sciences, their input is really valuable, particularly when some of the social science and history students start kind of talking about stuff they don't know as much about. It's useful for, it's not like a put down or something, but it's useful to have kind of this extra sort of this voice in the classroom. Further, when those students go on, to go into graduate school or going to be scientists or managers of labs or whatever, but have in the back of their head, like, oh yeah, I remember that, decision making in organizations or how governments make choices is not straightforward. It's not simple. It's not like an experimental design. It really is. Students that are going on to discuss environmental issues are going to have some kind of background in the scientific discussion. They're going to be able to talk to scientists about it.
And I think we have time for one more question. And I like this question, so it's kind of a nice one to end on. But what is it that you both love about Read? Or what keeps you here?
Mostly Chris Koski. That's a good question. It's pretty rewarding to work with students that can hang intellectually at the level that Reed students can hang at. There's an earnestness in our students in their desire to learn things and improve their thinking and their writing that it's pretty refreshing, and that when I talk to my colleagues elsewhere, they don't necessarily see. So it's a pretty, in that sense, it's easy to see how rewarding it is to teach here as opposed to someplace else.
Josh stole my answer. I was going to say Josh Howe, of course, is the rewarding part. I think the students are really the reason why we stick around. I mean, our day job, while we do see each other over a longer period of time, our day job really is interacting with students. And I find that Reed students are just genuinely intellectually curious. They're also incredibly respectful. They value knowledge, and they value people, not professors necessarily, but their fellow students who can impart it. It's just a very different vibe than maybe a typical college environment where there's a lot of other stuff going on, maybe that might be also valued. Here it really is, we value the experience of actually going to college. And I think that, as somebody whose job it is to teach college students, that keeps me here.
Well, thank you both for the kind and thoughtful answer there. And with that, I want to offer my tremendous thanks to Chris and Josh for making time and the conversation. And I can see why. The other person is the reason that you are staying here and, spending time with students and kind of nurturing these relationships. And I want to thank you all for joining us as well. We really appreciated the thoughtful conversation, the questions you posed in the chat box, and your curiosity in getting to know Reed a little bit better. We hope you'll join us at some upcoming events. I know there's an academic panel tomorrow evening where our current Dean of the Faculty and our most recent Dean of the Faculty will kind of give you more of a behind the scenes look at what the academic culture at Reed looks like. And then we'll also have a student panel this weekend on Saturday at 11 o'clock. So if you want to hear from current students, hear more about kind of some of the work that they get to do and the experiences they have at Reed, could be a good one to check out. But if we didn't get to your questions, feel free to email us at mission@reed.edu. But with that, thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day.